What's up, guys? Lucky Locks here, back with another video. This is going to be for PFL 7, Rory MacDonald versus Rory Cooper III. This should be a really good card, actually, and we got no UFC coming up this weekend, so we got this in Bellator to look forward to, so let's just get right into the action. First fight of the night, we got Stewart coming up against Espinoza at 155 pounds. So I'll be honest, I haven't really looked into this fight all that much. I'm definitely not going to touch it betting-wise, but just some initial impressions. Stewart 5-1, training at MMA Masters. He had a long layoff and then came back last year and got a win. He's still young, so I don't really think that layoff is a huge deal. Then, Espinoza 5-0, also down there in South Florida training. Hasn't really fought great competition either. Neither of them really have, but Espinoza is a bit more of a prolific finisher, so I'm probably going to go with Espinoza here, but it's pretty much just a shot in the dark. I'm staying away from this one, kind of low level. And yeah, guys, take this prediction with a grain of salt because I'll be completely honest, I really didn't look into this one that much. Next fight of the night, we have Bowen and Michael Lombardo at welterweight. So Bowen is 9-6, not really the greatest record. He lost his last two. One of them was the loss on the Contender Series. Then he just lost his last fight on PFL, and that was to Umalatov. So that's really not a bad loss, but I mean, Bowen, he hasn't looked the greatest lately. There's no denying that. Then looking at Lombardo, he's 11-2. Only 2 losses over his career, and one of those was to Kyle Daukaus on Dana White's Contender Series. And he actually found his way back onto the Contender Series in his last fight and was able to pick up a win. He's training at American Top Team. Lots of good training partners at his disposal down there. I just think that Lombardo is probably the better fighter here. I doubt that I'm going to touch this one from a gambling perspective. I think Lombardo's like minus 300 right now or something like that. But yeah, I do think he's the better fighter, so that's going to be my pick in this bout right here. Next fight on the card, we have Magomedkerimov coming up against Terrill at welterweight as well, and Umalatov is 10-0. Really impressive start to his career. Obviously, everything's gone according to plan so far. As an amateur, he was 11-2. One of those losses was his very first amateur bout, and that was against Magomedkerimov. So that's really not a bad loss. I mean, obviously he's a good fighter. I believe he's signed with Bellator now. Umalatov, obviously 10-0 as a pro, won his PFL debut last time out pretty easily over Bowen. Knocked him out very shortly after the second round bell rang. And I think he should probably be able to dominate here again. If I'm being completely honest, I do feel really good about him, and I do have him in a parlay. And I mean, looking across the cage at Micah, 15-8 overall over the course of his career. He's 37 years old now. And I mean, the highest level opponent that he's had in the last 5 or so years has been Sabah Hamasi, who finished him in under 20 seconds. So I just think that Umalatov is going to make it look pretty easy in this one. I do feel good about him in this spot. I just think he's a superior fighter. So I'm going with Umalatov here, and I do have a little bit of money on him in a parlay coming up for this card. Next up on the card, we have Brett Cooper coming up against Tyler Hill at lightweight. Cooper has a ton of fights on his resume with an overall record of 27-15, training down there at Body Shop with Antonio and AJ McKee and, other guys like Joey Davis. He's been over in Russia and ACA and ACB, and that's just pretty much music to my ears. Pretty massive difference in level of competition between Brett Cooper and Tyler Hill in this one. Hill is a 10-5 guy. I think he'll be much bigger here. He'll have that, physical advantage, but he really hasn't fought any high-level competition. His last competition of any kind was a bare knuckle bout at BKFC 16, where he was finished pretty early. So I'm going to be going with Brett Cooper in this one. I don't know a ton about these guys, but I think the big gap in competition level the two men have faced will, outweigh the physical advantages that Hill will have in this one. So yeah, going with Brett Cooper to get the job done here. Now we have an interesting matchup at lightweight between Olivier Aubin-Mercier and Daryl Horcher. And Aubin-Mercier is 12-5. He was on a rough skid coming out of the UFC, but those were pretty tough fights that he was dropping. Got a nice win last time out over Martinez, slightly younger guy in this matchup. I believe that he had a higher peak than Horcher, at the prime of both of their careers, and I do think that OAM has a little bit more left in the tank at this point in his career. He's got good wrestling and grappling. I'm not really overly impressed with his work standing, but I think that he's just a solid fighter. I think he's kind of better overall and is just going to have the advantage in the areas that it counts in this match. Horcher is pretty decent too, 14-4, decent runs on Bellator and CFFC. Then came to the UFC and went 1-3. Now, granted, those losses came to Holtzman, Khabib, and Roosevelt Roberts, so it's not like he was losing to bums, but I mean, those are tough matches, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to keep up with Aubin-Mercier in this one. Horcher also does have some good wrestling too, so I think that makes things interesting, but I'm going to pick OAM here. I think he's just better in this one. I see him getting the dominant positions and generally fighting this fight on his own terms. I think that this might be a little bit closer than the line indicates, but I do think that OAM is going to get it done, so that's going to be my pick in this one. Now we have Curtis Millender and Gleison Tibau at welterweight, so this is an interesting matchup here. Curtis Millender, 18-8. He's going to be the much bigger man in this fight. He's going to have a 10-inch reach advantage, which is pretty absurd. He's younger by 5 years here, but he is 1-4 over his last 5. But when you really look into it, those losses were Bilal Muhammad, Sabah Hamasi, Rory MacDonald, and Magomedkerimov. So you can kind of give him a pass for most of those. I do think that he'll actually be able to use his range here to kind of get the fight that he wants for the most part. Gleison Tibau, 35-15. I feel like he was extremely lucky to get the win last time out. But with that said, he did hang in there with Rory MacDonald. I think that the size and range of Millender paired with the slight youth advantage might be difficult for Tibau to overcome, but I wouldn't count him out completely. I think that this could be a really close match, but from a betting standpoint, I do think that the value is on Millender as the underdog here, considering the physical differences between the two fighters. So, not super confident, but give me Curtis Millender to get it done in this spot. Alright, and now we have a rematch between Loic Radzhabov and Alex Martinez at welterweight. Radzhabov 14-3-1, 2-2-1 over his last 5, and we just saw this fight in the first week, I believe, of PFL this year. I thought Radzhabov deserved to win the decision, but it was pretty close. But yeah, I still felt like Radzhabov won that fight. I think that Radzhabov will be able to make the adjustments to make it more clear to the judges this time who the better fighter is. He's coming off a nice win over Aliev. And Martinez, on the other hand, 8-1, 3-1-1 over his last 5. He will have the size advantage once again, but outside of the last 2 fights he's had, he really hasn't faced the same level guys as Radzhabov. I mean, now that we've actually seen this fight before, I don't know how much I really care about any of that peripheral information, but it's just like I think Radzhabov is better here. I felt like he won last time, and I think that this time, he'll make the adjustments. Come out more motivated, a little more aggressive standing, and just work his grappling to be able to get a win in this one. So I'm gonna go with Radzhabov here to get the job done and avenge the loss that he suffered in their last meeting. Now, moving on up the card, we have Clay Collard and Haush Manfio at welterweight as well. And Collard is 20-8 overall, 4-1 over his last 5 fights, with an impressive win over Anthony Pettis on his resume. Cashed as a big dog for anybody who was on him that night. I was not one of them. I thought Pettis was going to get it done, but Collard looked really good. And he really hasn't been great after the first 2 rounds in his last 2 fights, but still overall he's been pretty solid. Obviously he's a good striker, he has heavy hands. There's just a lot to like about Clay Collard, and looking at Haush Manfio, 13-3, also 4-1 over his last 5, but I just think he's a slightly lower level fighter than Clay Collard is. He kind of squeaked by in his last 2 fights. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that he's made it this far in the PFL season. 2 split decision wins for Manfio. Both guys have fought the same guys for their last 2 fights. Manfio was able to get the win over Pettis as well. I think that Collard definitely put on a better performance against Pettis than Manfio did. And on paper, this does seem like a close match, but I think that Clay Collard is just a little bit better. Like I said, close on paper, but I think in the cage, Collard will look like the better fighter. I did put some money on him at -125. That line has shifted, a fair amount at this point. He's a heavier favorite now. But I do still like Clay Collard, and I do still think that he's able to get the job done in this one over Haush Manfio. So that brings us up to the co-main event of the evening, and that's going to be Magomedkerimov coming up against Sadibou, and that is at 170 pounds as well. And Magomedkerimov, 25-8 overall, 5-0 in his last 5, 12-0 in his last 12. The guy hasn't lost since 2015, so not too much you can really nitpick about his record, on paper. 10-0 in the PFL and World Series of Fighting combined. just, one fight before they turned it into PFL. He won the PFL tournament in 2018. He is an excellent grappler and wrestler with just good all-around ability. He's a younger man here by 3 years. And looking at Tibau, 9-5-2 overall, 2-1-2 in his last 5. Short notice opponent change here. Magomedkerimov was actually supposed to be fighting João Zeferino, but he withdrew, so now we have Tibau filling in, and C was supposed to be fighting Gleison Tibau, and now he has drawn a much more difficult opponent. So we saw C improve his takedown defense a little bit last fight and actually managed to get an impressive win over Alexei Kunchenko. He has a big reach advantage here, but I just think Magomedkerimov is too good. If I'm being honest, I just think he's too good for C. I have Magomedkerimov in a parlay with Umalatov, and I feel really good about him in this spot. So that's going to be my pick in this one, Magomedkerimov. Now the main event of the evening, we have Rory MacDonald and Rory Cooper III, welterweight matchup. Both these guys have the exact same record of 22-7-1. And looking at Rory MacDonald, obviously, he was robbed in that last fight against Tibau. There's really no other way to put it. I thought it was extremely obvious that he won the decision, but at the same time, you kind of hope that against a guy like Tibau, it'd be a little more decisive. I do feel like it was quite decisive, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's Gleison Tibau, right? You would think that MacDonald wouldn't leave any doubt in the mind of any judges. And is that Rory, at the same level that he was in the peak of his prime? No, I wouldn't say so, but he still looked pretty good. Rory Cooper is just a really tough fight, though. MacDonald does have that 9-inch reach advantage here, significantly taller as well, and probably a little bit better in terms of technique, too. I'd say a longtime TriStar guy now down at Sanford MMA in South Florida. But Rory Cooper has that strength. He's built like a brick house. He's training at 808 with those Hawaiian killers. Powerful wrestling, powerful striking. If it gets wild, he could do some real damage to Rory in this one. Cooper is 4-0-1 in his last 5, whereas Rory is 2-2-1 in his last 5. Cooper just has a really impressive win over Alex Shakin last time out. Not many people thought he'd win that. I actually kind of liked him in that spot. And kind of for the same reason that I like him in this one. He's 4 years younger in this matchup. I just think that the value is on Rory Cooper here from a betting perspective as the underdog. But it should be a really close fight and should be really entertaining. It hurts my heart to go against Rory MacDonald here, but I do think that Rory Cooper is the value side of this match. So that's going to do it for my picks for this one, guys, for PFL 7 here. Thanks for watching with me. I appreciate everyone who takes the time to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Appreciate every last one of you. And have a great day, guys. Take it easy. I'll catch you on the next one.